The hospital room felt suffocating, despite the sterile air circulating through the vents. The lights overhead hummed softly, almost mockingly, as I sat there alone. Holding him in my arms should have been the happiest moment of my life, yet I felt as though the ground beneath me had crumbled into nothingness. My heart ached, not just from the physical pain of childbirth, but from the deeper, more profound wound that had been inflicted. My parents, the people I had trusted most in the world, had chosen not to be there. I looked down at my son, his tiny fingers clutching my hand, his face so innocent, so unaware of the betrayal that had unfolded outside the walls of this hospital. I thought of how many times I had dreamed of this day, of being surrounded by love, by the joy of family, by the warmth of the people who had raised me. But instead, I was alone. The cold hospital room, the beeping of machines, and the occasional murmur of nurses were the only companions I had. Where were my parents? I had been calling them for hours, desperate for their support, desperate for their love. But all I had received was a brief, dismissive text from my mother. "We can't make it. Your sister's gender reveal is today." It's a big deal. It felt like a slap to the face. A big deal? A celebration of something so trivial, a gender reveal party, while I was about to become a mother, a moment that should have been life-defining. My hands trembled as I read the words again. I felt my chest tighten. Tears threatened to spill, but I refused to let them. No, not now. I couldn't break down. Not yet. I tried calling again, hoping that perhaps this time they'd answer, but there was no reply. My mother's voice had been calm, almost indifferent. "We can't make it," she had said, as though the birth of my son was just another unimportant event. I was their daughter, the one they had watched grow, the one who had always tried to meet their expectations, and yet, it felt like I didn't matter. Not anymore. The words from that text replayed in my head over and over, each repetition chipping away at the trust I had so blindly placed in them. All my life, I had sought their approval. I had worked hard to make them proud, done everything in my power to ensure that they saw me as worthy of their love. Yet here I was, alone in my most vulnerable moment, with no one by my side. I felt anger rising within me, hot and fierce, but it was laced with sorrow. I could feel the sting of betrayal in every inch of my body. Why had they chosen her over me? My sister, who had always seemed to be the golden child, the one who never had to try, who always got the attention, the love, the praise. She was the one they had showered with everything. The gender reveal party, the constant celebrations, the endless praise, it was all for her. How many times had I been overlooked in favor of her? How many milestones had I reached, only to be overshadowed by her presence? I had graduated from college with honors, but my parents hadn't been there. I had bought my first home, worked tirelessly to build a life of my own, but my parents had been too busy with family gatherings at our house to even acknowledge my achievements. And now, the most important day of my life, the birth of my son, and they couldn't even show up. I clutched my baby tighter, a protective instinct kicking in. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him, my son. I wasn't going to let the same thing happen to him. I would never let my parents treat him the way they had treated me. The tears finally came, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of anger, of frustration, of realization. It wasn't just about one day, one event. It was about years of feeling unimportant, of being neglected in favor of someone else. And now, as I sat there in that cold hospital room, I realized that I was done. I was done trying to earn their love. I was done being the dutiful daughter, the one who always bent over backward to make everyone else happy. I could feel my pulse quicken as the weight of my emotions surged. The betrayal had shattered something deep inside me, something that I had thought was unbreakable. My trust in my parents, in the very people who had raised me, was gone. It wasn't just the disappointment anymore, it was the anger. I'd been abandoned in my most vulnerable moment, and I wasn't going to let that go easily. My mind began to race, the anger turning into something more. I had been wronged, and now I had to make them feel it. They needed to understand what they had done to me. I had been ignored, overlooked, left behind for far too long. It was time for them to experience the same pain, the same isolation I had felt my entire life. I remembered the countless times I had tried to please them, the times I had sacrificed my own happiness in order to keep them happy. I had worked hard to be the daughter they wanted, to be the person they could be proud of, but none of that mattered. All they cared about was her. And now I was going to make them see. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need them to love me, but I did need them to understand. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my breathing. My son's soft breaths filled the silence, grounding me in the present moment. But even as I held him, I knew I had already made a decision. I was going to make them regret what they had done to me. I would make them realize how deeply they had hurt me. I wasn't just going to let this go. But how? I didn't have the answer yet, but I could feel it stirring deep within me. The seed of revenge had been planted, and I would nurture it until it grew. I didn't know what form it would take, but I could already taste the bitterness of it on my tongue. They'll pay for this, I thought, my resolve hardening. They'll regret ever making me feel invisible. And with that thought, I stood up from the bed, cradling my son in my arms. He was the only thing that mattered now. I would protect him from the pain I had endured. But first, I had to make them understand. I had to make them feel the weight of their actions. I stepped out of the hospital room, my mind already starting to plan. The road to revenge was not an easy one, but I would walk it. I would make them see what it felt like to be discarded, to be cast aside for someone else. They would never forget the price of their betrayal. And so the journey began. The days that followed the birth of my son were filled with a strange emptiness. The world outside continued as normal, but inside I felt like I was suspended in a space where time moved slower, deliberately torturing me with each passing second. The hospital room that had once felt so sterile and distant now seemed like the only place. I could hide from everything, hide from my parents' rejection, hide from the emotional weight of their absence. It wasn't just a momentary lapse. It was a fracture that went deep, shaking me to the core. Each time I looked at my baby boy, I couldn't help but wonder, would he ever feel the same way I did? I would never let him feel the sting of being ignored, pushed aside, and abandoned. Not like I had. Not like I was. But the more I thought about it, the deeper the wounds seemed to grow. My parents, the people who had shaped my life, who had been there for every milestone, every birthday, every achievement I had ever had. How could they have chosen her over me? My sister, always the golden child, always the one with the constant flow of attention and praise. Every time she smiled, it felt like the world smiled with her, while I was left standing in her shadow. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the painful thoughts. How could they do this to me? How could they abandon me on the most important day of my life? I had always been the one to do everything right. I had never caused trouble. I had never done anything to make them feel like they had to choose. But they had chosen, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken trust. The house felt empty when I returned home, a stark contrast to the joy I should have been feeling with the arrival of my son. I set him down in his crib, watching him sleep peacefully, and the ache inside me only deepened. My parents had no idea what I was going through. They had no idea what it felt like to be ignored, to be tossed aside for something trivial. They thought that by sending me a half-hearted congratulations text later, they could just fix it. But nothing would ever be the same. The first few days back from the hospital, I tried to hold on to a shred of normalcy. I tried to keep myself busy arranging baby clothes, setting up his nursery, telling myself it would get better. But each time I picked up my phone, I saw the notifications, the messages from my sister and friends congratulating me, the messages from my parents that seemed so distant. "We're sorry we missed your birth, but we were at your sister's reveal party," they had said. It was important to her. But it wasn't just the absence, it was the indifference. The absolute lack of effort to make things right. I thought back to the countless moments when I had been there for them, when I had stood by them, when I had been the one to pick up the pieces for everyone else. I remembered how, when I was younger, I would stay up late to help my mother with her projects, or how I would clean up after family gatherings, hoping that they would see how much I cared. I'd always been the reliable one, but what did it get me? What did it get us? I opened the door to my sister's room one evening, my heart heavy with the weight of all the unspoken words. She was sitting there, scrolling through her phone, smiling at some post. She looked up when I entered, and her face lit up in that way she had, like everything was always right in her world. Perfect. Hey! She greeted me warmly, almost as though nothing had happened. I forced a smile, a cold, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual, but the anger simmered beneath my words. How could she not know? How's the baby? Mom and Dad are just so thrilled. I wish I could have been there when you went into labor, but I was at my party, you know? She said, her voice bright, her eyes glimmering with excitement. She didn't even seem to notice the tension in the room. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the words that threatened to spill out. Yeah, I know. They were too busy with your big event to even check on me. Her smile faltered for a split second, just enough for me to catch it. I'm sure they didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. You know how they are. They just get excited. That's when the anger hit its peak, rising up from somewhere deep inside of me. Excited? Over a gender reveal party? And here I was, recovering from childbirth with no one around, feeling like I didn't matter. I felt my chest tighten as I looked at her, the person who had never been there when I needed her most. The person who took and took, but never gave. They didn't even call me, you know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, her eyes blinking rapidly, as if she was processing my words. There was no real understanding in her gaze, just a vague sense of confusion. She shook her head, dismissing it all. Oh, come on. You know they love you. They just had a lot going on. You've got to understand they're only human. I felt the walls inside me crumble. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want her understanding. I didn't want their excuses. I wanted them to know how it felt to be cast aside. My heart raced with the realization that I had been holding on to something that wasn't real. My parents loved her more than they loved me, and the truth was, they always had. They hadn't just made a mistake, they had made a choice. And now I had to make one too. The days that followed were filled with a kind of numbness, like I was walking through the motions of life without truly living it. I spent more time alone with my baby, watching his innocent face as he slept, wondering how long it would take for him to grow old enough to realize the patterns in this family. Would he be treated the same way I had been? Would he feel the same cold indifference from the people who should love him unconditionally? But the pain began to turn into something else, something darker, something that twisted deep within me. I started to think not about how to heal, but about how to make them feel the way I did. I needed to teach them a lesson. I needed them to know what it felt like to lose someone they loved, someone who had always been there for them. They would understand, not through words, but through actions. My actions. I spent the next few days plotting, quietly, carefully. I wasn't going to destroy them. No, that wasn't my goal. But they had to understand the consequences of their choices. They had to feel the same pain, the same sense of being left behind. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew I could make them feel the weight of their betrayal. It wasn't going to be immediate, and it wasn't going to be easy. But I would make it happen. I didn't want revenge to consume me, but the more I thought about it, the more the idea took root in my mind. I would make them realize the depths of what they had done to me, how they had crushed my heart, betrayed my trust. But there was still a part of me, deep down, that wasn't entirely sure if I was ready for this. Could I really go through with it? Could I follow through on the plan that was forming in my mind? I looked at my son as he slept, his tiny hands gripping the edge of his blanket, and I knew in that moment that I had to do this, not for me, but for him. I would protect him from the pain I had endured. I would never let him feel the sting of rejection that had cut me to the bone. I stood up, my heart heavy but resolute. The plan was beginning to take shape in my mind, and there was no turning back. They had made their choice. Now it was my turn to make mine.